Okay, VisualPolitik fans, I'm going to start by setting you a challenge. Pay attention to the following data. Imagine that there is a country with inflation above 50% every year, where almost half of the population lives in poverty, a country with very few quality jobs, and a chronic shortage of foreign currency and investment. A country that has been experiencing a situation of almost constant economic, political, and social crisis for decades, and that has fallen far behind in terms of productive technology. Come on, things cannot continue like this. They are facing an unsustainable scenario, right? A situation in which it's time to sit down and make some real decisions. The question is, if you were in charge, what decision would you make? Well, I'm sure that with so many internal problems, one of the solutions that many of you would put forward would be this country must clearly turn to foreign trade. After all, this would allow it to earn a lot of foreign currency, create new jobs, attract new investments, acquire new technologies, new markets, and a long list of other benefits. We are talking about a formula that has been used by many governments around the world, from Spain to Japan, Poland, China, and Singapore. However, VisualPolitik viewers, there is a country with many more problems than those we have described in this video, in which the term international trade is treated almost like heresy. I am, of course, referring to Argentina, a country that seems to be allergic to the outside world. But why is Argentina so hostile to foreign trade? What are the obstacles? How could the land of tango and barbecues convert foreign trade into an enormous source of wealth? In this video, we're going to answer all of these questions, but first we have to see where all of this started. Check this out.
From globalization to isolation.
Argentina was a sparsely populated and impoverished country until the 19th century, when an enormous social and economic change took place. The country opened up to the world and millions of immigrants and investments began to arrive, allowing the great expansion of the humid papas to be put to work. And so, little by little, Argentina became the granary of the world, and also one of the most prosperous countries on earth. The railroads transported to the ports of Rosario and Buenos Aires, the produce of the countryside obtained through the hard work of the European immigrants who had arrived in the country in search of fortune. In this way, cities grew, investments accumulated, and the country had its own version of the American dream. However, everything began to change when the Great Crash broke out in 1929, a crisis that originated in the United States but soon spread to the rest of the world. Argentina was no exception. From that moment on, many pointed to international trade, open borders, and the gold standard as the key ingredients of the crisis. This provoked a huge wave of nationalism, interventionism, and protectionism in world politics. And do you know what? Argentina was an outstanding student in this very field. The economic liberalism and agro-export economy that had characterized the gaucho country up until then were considered an outdated model. The majority opinion began to lean towards the country focusing on carrying out a process of internal industrialization that would allow it to succeed independently of the fluctuations of the international economy. These ideas were consolidated with the outbreak of the Second World War, and particularly with the coming to power of Juan Domingo Perón in 1946. From that moment on, the country would gradually cut itself off from the global economy, following the so-called import substitution policy, a type of policy that reached its peak in the 1970s. In fact, one of the books that has most influenced Argentine economists is the work entitled Vivir con lo Nuestro, Living with What Is Ours, published in the early 1980s by the so-called Argentine Paul Krugman, that is, Ado Ferreira. Living with what's ours. I don't really think that needs much of an explanation. The fact is that, apart from the brief interval of Menem's presidency, which, by the way, we've already covered here on VisualPolitik, Argentine politicians have worked hard to isolate the country from the rest of the world. Well, the exception is if we are talking about the International Monetary Fund dollars. In that case, you know that Argentine politicians always put their hand out first, and then when it is time to pay, come up with a million excuses.
No vamos a asumir ningún compromiso con nuestra deuda por ustedes.
Argentina, far from promoting exports, has raised all kinds of barriers to foreign trade. This is a completely paradigmatic case in international politics. And take note, because we are talking about a task that politicians have taken very seriously. Even when the results have been calamitous, not only have they not changed course, but they have stepped on the accelerator. And you know what? That is precisely what the current president, Alberto Fernandez, is doing. Check this out.
in search of the dollar.
The most surprising aspect of the Argentine case is not that politicians have become obsessed with hindering imports with the excuse of promoting domestic industry and avoiding the loss of foreign currency. After all, that is something that many other governments around the world have done. And that, by the way, always ends badly. Among other reasons, because competition and the use of cheaper or more technology advanced inputs are harmed, while captive markets are generated. No, the most striking thing about the Argentine case is that the country is in desperate need of dollars and then punishes its own exports. Yeah. That's why I said the Argentine government just keeps hindering foreign transactions, both buying and selling. Basically, if you are an Argentine business person and you want to trade with foreign countries, you are treated suspiciously. Now, the question is, how exactly does the state do it? What mechanisms does the Argentine government use to torpedo international trade? Well, you see, currently, the first factor is capital controls. That is, in the rules that the government has set for Argentines who want to buy, sell, and move dollars, which, as you all know, is the reference currency for world trade. These controls have led to two exchange rates in the Gaucho country. On the one hand, there is the official exchange rate, which at the time of making this video was around 104 pesos per dollar. And on the other hand, we have the free exchange rate in the informal market, better known as the blue dollar exchange rate, where, to give you an idea, the dollar costs twice as much, about 220 pesos per dollar. Of course, all banking operations are carried out taking into account the official dollar, which, as we are about to see, is not so easy to obtain. But let's start by looking at what happens with purchases, that is, imports. Any company, large, medium, or small, that needs to import products from abroad must face a long labyrinth of paperwork and forms that will make it very difficult to obtain the foreign currency it needs. You see, in order to import products, companies have to obtain an LNA, a non-automatic import license. These are licenses granted by the Argentine state in a totally discretionary manner. In other words, getting one will depend on whether the official on duty considers that your request to buy abroad makes sense or not. And so, the interested parties are obliged to explain why and for what purpose they want the foreign currency, request it well in advance, and pray that the official in charge of the case will listen to their prayers and grant them the much needed license. If not, tough luck. You're basically screwed. In this way, the Argentine government controls the volume of imports entering the country, and if suddenly the foreign exchange of the central bank is reduced very fast, the faucet is closed, and many more licenses than usual are rejected. Although this, of course, means a very harsh punishment for local companies that, overnight, may face the inability to obtain raw materials on products from abroad that are necessary for their activity. Bad luck. This explains why in Argentina it is common for companies to face recurring shortages of materials which, for example, may prevent them from improving production or repairing a machine. So you see, the official dollar in Argentina is cheap, but it comes with a hell of a catch. But wait a minute, if you get along well with the government, voila, you can have an inexhaustible source of wealth. Why? Well, because by setting an official rate that has nothing to do with the market rate, what the government is doing is basically subsidizing your purchases abroad. But, I repeat, only as long as you have their blessing. Yes, I know, it's a pretty awful system. Okay, so this is true for imports, but what about exports and foreign sales? Well, VisualPolitik fans, if you export a product and you get dollars, the government is going to forcefully convert them into pesos, at the official exchange rate, of course. That is, at 104 pesos per dollar and not at 220, which was the price of the blue dollar at the time of making this video. The problem is that Argentina's economy, in the face of the peso disaster, is largely dollarized, and so the costs of companies are determined in many cases by the exchange rate of the blue dollar. To put it another way, when a company decides to export its production, what it will receive are pesos at an exchange rate that is half of what the dollars that the government takes away from it are worth in the market. Remember that when an Argentine company wants to import something, it benefits from the cheap dollar. The problem is that in addition to having to pay a lot of tariffs, it is not guaranteed to have access to dollars. And when you want to export, well, you end up only getting half. Crazy. Or loco, as they might say. This, in addition to taxes, labor regulations, and well, all kinds of obstacles in the country, explains why despite Argentina's low wage costs, there are practically no multinationals willing to invest in the country to produce there and then sell to the rest of the world. Because, of course, given such an environment, who would do it? But take note. because this is not the end of the story. Since these types of policies have destroyed its industrial sector, Argentina is mainly characterized by the export of agri-food products such as meat, cereals, and flour. These products are also consumed by Argentines themselves. In order to prevent foreign buyers from competing with local consumers, Argentine companies face maximum export quotas. In other words, the government forces companies to sell a considerable part of their production of the local market at prices set by the government itself. This all may seem very nice, very considerate even. The problem, though, VisualPolitik fans, is that it reduces foreign exchange inflows, wages, and investment in increasing productive capacity. The end result is bad for everyone. But then there's even more. For the last 20 years, Argentina's star export has been soya beans, a product that is devoured in China but barely consumed locally. So here, the export quota is meaningless. Now, did you think this was going to stop the politicians? Well, if so, you are very much mistaken. Soybean producers can export as much soybeans as they want, but in return, they pay an additional tax, an extraordinary tax. While the blue dollar, which is the free dollar, trades around 220 pesos, soybean exporters barely receive 70 pesos for each dollar they export. This is because the government first converts the dollars into pesos at the official exchange rate and then imposes an additional tax of 33%, from 220 to 70 pesos per dollar exported. Take a deep breath, because we're still not done yet. As if all of this were not enough, the government keeps approving new barriers to make it increasingly difficult to sell abroad. For example, agro-exporters must be registered in the so-called Registry of Operators in the Agri-Food Chain, something that forces them to deal with a lot of paperwork. For example, they have to make statements about the sales they plan to make in the coming year, submit financial information to prove they are solvent, report in detail on their employers and the salaries they pay, verify that the companies they interact with also comply with the Argentine government's requirements, and so on and so forth. In short, it's a complete nightmare. And then there's even more. Once it has dealt with the government, any company that wants to export has to deal with the control of two powerful unions, that of the truck drivers, led by the Moneo clan, and that of the port employees. Suffice to say that the intervention of these unions makes transportation in Argentina particularly expensive, competition limited, and schedules and service a disaster. On top of that, if you don't get along with unions or you don't pay them the dues they want, forget about it, because they will probably stop the shipment and you won't be able to do anything with it. And these are just a few examples of what day-to-day life is like. Because yes, being an exporter in Argentina is almost mission impossible. And the data corroborates this. Argentina's economy is one of the most closed to international trade in the world. It is a country that has decided to do exactly the opposite of what the most prosperous countries have done. Exactly the opposite strategy to the one that once made this country one of the richest in the world. But having reached this point, it's over to you. With all these obstacles, would you consider investing in Argentina? What do you think explains the great obsession against foreign trade? Leave us your answers in the comments below. And now, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to all of us here at VisualPolitik. All the best, and I'll see you next time.